Hi everyone, my name is Siemón. I'm a designer, animator, and director in New York City. I'm also faculty at School of Visual Arts. And today I'd like to talk to you about all things cameras. So we're going to go over different types of animation and controls for camera, and also how to set them up and the different types that there are in Cinema 4D. So all exciting stuff. Before we jump into that, let me show you my reel, and then I'll talk a little bit about myself, and then we'll get going. Okay, a quick disclaimer about my demo reel. It's about 3 years old, and I didn't have time to cut a new one. However, you can go to my site, www.juliasimone.com, and check out new work posted there. A little bit about myself. I started my 3D journey in freshman year in college. I went to just a regular university. I didn't have an art program. It had a small one in a horse barn that you pretty much had to like go almost out of bounds of university to get to. It was literally like a stepchild that they just, an afterthought that they just stuck somewhere. They're like, oh, there's a horse barn we're not using. Let's just put the art kids there. But they did have a great communications department. And that's where I took a class in 3D. I don't even remember what it was called, but I think it was just called like 3D something. And the professor there was excellent. He actually exposed me to SIGGRAPH. He told me that I should volunteer for the SIGGRAPH conference. And I did, and I volunteered there for the rest of my undergrad and graduate as well. SIGGRAPH is, it's not as big as NAB, but it's very focused on 3D animation and just 3D in general, everything 3D. So that's its focus. And Pixar was there, like in the 80s, I think, or like late 80s or something like that. Like there's just a lot of history with that conference, and it's a really great environment to be in. So I highly recommend going there when everything is somewhat back to normal, whenever that may be, hopefully soon. So that was that, and that's where I found SCAD. They had a booth there, so I applied for my graduate program there. So I did my MFA at SCAD, and also great experience. Learned a ton, and then I went onward to my professional career, and I always had 3D after that class. Just stayed with me. I've always done 3D, even when I was doing like websites. I try to squeeze in like some 3D designs in there as well. And from then on, I went working for broadcast companies. I worked for news organizations. I worked for 4 years at Trollback as a senior designer animator. Great experience there as well. The projects there were really excellent, and one of my favorite spots I did there with Elliot, the creative director, and I actually did my first presentation on that spot. After that, I left to go freelance. And that's been an amazing journey so far. So it put me in a lot of different places. I've done live events. Well, I've done all sorts of different interesting projects. So I've started doing some AR with Spark. So, the journey continues. There's always new things. So I love that. I love emerging technologies. That's another reason why SIGGRAPH was such a great conference, because they do have a whole section for just emerging technologies, and that's just, it's like a passion of mine. When I have time, just exploring the new possibilities, VR, AR, that's kind of the new trend, I suppose. But it's all very exciting, and cinema has always been at the forefront of that. Another thing to note is how I came upon Cinema 4D was I was using other 3D softwares, and they were so clunky. To bevel something, it just took like 20 steps when someone was like, well, why don't you just use Cinema 4D? And then I did, and then there wasn't 20 steps to bevel type. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, where were you all my life? So, and now it's just like a really good friend of mine. I open it up, and then I feel at home, and it's very comforting to work in after dealing with other less comforting softwares, so to speak. Okay. Now let's talk about my presentation, what I'll be presenting on, now that you have a general idea of who I am as an artist. So why I picked this topic? The reason I picked this topic was because throughout my years as an educator at SVA, I've noticed that my students have somewhat of a tough time with cameras, just understanding cameras and how to work with them, because when we go through modeling, texturing, and lighting, it's fairly static. It doesn't, you just put it there and it sits there and great, and it lights your stuff. You might do some MoGraph things, some animation, but your camera is static, so as long as you frame it, that's it. Like, you don't really have to worry about it. And then when we start getting into the actual utilization of 3D space and actually traveling through that 3D space, that's when I feel that challenges arise. It's a complicated topic, and it doesn't really get a lot of love or attention because it's not sexy. It's not it's not like we're doing films where film camera is king, and cinematography has its own Oscar, but in Cinema 4D, I mean, in 3D in general, cameras don't really get a lot of love. Like, it's kind of like a hidden thing. Like, oh, you're great at cameras. Okay, great. Like, we're gonna, like, you can do that. And it's kind of taken for granted, as opposed to all the fabulous, X particles things that just, I mean, it looks amazing and it's beautiful. But you need to know cameras. You need to know if you're going into advertising, if you're going into production, especially like products, cameras are very important in that sense. So, when companies are developing their new product, someone's going to have to show it off. Someone's going to have to move that camera around and make it exciting, especially for phones, phone commercials, and other products. Really anything. I mean, you got sports graphics, you got, so that's actually what I'm going to show now, is some examples from studios that I love for really excellent camera work. And it's important to pay attention to how camera work is done, even in films. So let me switch my slide to that. Amazing 3D camera work done by other studios. I did not work on any of these projects that I'm going to be showing right now, but I think they're excellent examples of really good solid camera work. The uses are, as I've mentioned before, product commercials are a big one. Title sequences, such as this one here, the Game of Thrones one, and really anything that needs movement, because you can be not an animator, just a 3D designer, and you can design something that looks amazing. And then if you just add a slight camera move, that's it. You're a motion artist. You're done. Let me show you the example I think is one of the best for camera motion and camera animation. This title sequence was done by Elastic for Game of Thrones Season 8. And you can see these camera sweeps and the way that it rotates and it goes through the, between the wall, and it just keeps on going, the way that it rotated so seamlessly. Just the spin here, like it's all very fluid and it's just really beautifully executed. The cuts don't feel jarring. It flows through, it tells a story. It highlights all the important animation and objects and spaces. And it's really this journey that's being shown through this camera move. And I think it's probably one of the best examples of 3D camera work out there, because it has a huge landscape to go through. There's so many pieces, there's so much detail, and it does it beautifully. Just two more examples I want to show you before I jump into Cinema 4D. So this one was done for Motorola Razr, the new phone. I used to have a pink one way back in the day, but this commercial is a really great introduction to the features of the phone. They do really an amazing job at showing the old one versus the new one. It's just an amazing camera work. Just the macro shots, you have to have macro shots on phones. Like it's a must. Everything about this commercial is excellent. There's excellent shading, lighting, and on top of that, the camera is so fluid. The cuts are fluid. The motion highlights the phone, which is important, and it's seamless. Like you don't even have to think about the fact that there's camera. Like you're just so used to seeing this that it doesn't feel like, oh, it doesn't take away from the product. It actually adds so much to it. This different kind of camera animations and macro shots and everything else. It elevates it greatly. But overall, like this whole entire spot is just all three things: lighting, shading, lighting, texturing, and camera work work seamlessly together. So it's a beautiful shot. But again, when you're seeing commercials like these, just pay attention to not only the shading and the lighting, but start paying attention to the camera work. Just things like that. Like somebody had to go in and position the camera to like this, to animate the camera here going up and over. And sometimes it's like really confusing because you're seeing this and you're like, oh, is a phone moving or is a camera? Most of the time it's a camera moving, unless it's obviously like the flip. But yeah. So the next one I want to talk about is Soy Cuba. When I was in grad school, they showed this as the gold standard for cinematography, just the camera work itself. And I never heard about this movie before, but it was done by a Russian director in the 60s, and it's also a really great reference to have as well. For you can see these long shots that were excellently directed. They tell a story, they go through spaces, there's just this like rotation and showing everything, all these scenes. It's flawless. So I highly recommend also, when you're watching movies, pay attention to the camera work. I mean, there are some cuts in this movie, but they're far and few in between. So how you maneuver through your objects, all of this is great to pay attention to, and just have that in your back pocket. Now let's talk about a project that I worked on. The project I want to show you next was for Oral-B bamboo toothbrush. It's a sizzle. It was done at a studio called Entropic. They have offices in San Francisco, New York, LA, and London. The studio is really great. I love working there. I've worked there for about on and off like 3 years, I believe. And it's always great to come back. The people there have great energy and very talented as well. I'm really excited to show you this project because I was the lead on this project and I got to animate, texture, light, the whole thing. I had help from a few of my friends on the compositing side. So this was really just a really great workflow. And I had an excellent producer who helped have this project on track. We never had to stay late, which I love. And it was very minimal changes as well from the client, almost none, which made this project run so smoothly and have a very special place in my heart because of it. Also, it was the first project that I entirely did in Redshift. Before this, when I work at Entropics especially, I do the animation, and then I hand it over to my good friend Andrew Hess, who then goes in and textures, lights, and renders it. And we kind of work as a team, and it always has an amazing results. However, in this case, I had to do everything myself, but I learned a great deal from him, so I was able to do it no problem. So another reason why I really enjoyed working on this spot especially. So again, as you can see, it's it's a toothbrush. How do you make a bamboo toothbrush exciting? And especially when there's not a lot of visuals, right? There's not really a lot going on in terms of secondary animation. There's maybe a few bamboo leaves, but really not a lot except for the toothbrush and the space that it lives in. So a lot of this has to rely on beautiful camera work, just the macro shots, which is this shot here, and it's you also have to carry over the messaging as well, because you have some supers that have to live in there in that environment. So how do you do the supers? And it's just it's a lot of creative camera work to make this. It's a 30-second spot that you have to fill. And keep the viewer interested. And how do you do that? Well, again, camera work. So let me jump into Cinema 4D here, and I'll tell you this first scene. Just really quick breakdown. I'm not gonna dive too much because there's really not a lot going on. It's all in the camera. The way that I like to work is I have my main camera here, and then I have nulls that are driving the different attributes of the camera. So for position, I have a camera position null here that's driving only the position attributes, and then for the camera rotation, I have the camera, there's just the null is driving the rotation. I also have a target as well for the middle here, so that when it spins, it doesn't go off this table, so just to better control it. Next scene I want to break down really quickly is this one over here, where the camera zooms down and it goes through, and you have this depth of field change. Let me play that for you. So again, let's jump in here. What I originally did, I actually had it in reverse. So I started off with a close-up and then pulled up away from it. So in the edit, when I was lining everything up, I just reversed my animation. So in After Effects, I just went in and flipped the time for this. So that brings me to another point I want to make is when I'm laying the camera work for my commercials that I'm working on, I'd like to do my own edit first before I hand it over to an editor, if there is an editor on the project. There was an editor on this one. So I did the edit first just so I know how to place my shots, where my camera is, make sure there's no jarring edits. And I find that that saves me time in the long run. So I find that doing this work up front just makes it go so much smoother. So all of these shots, there were a few fillers that I had to just go back and create like new shots to fill in the gaps or to have them match better, but very minimal, almost none. All of this was already thought out before the editor started, making adjustments based on client notes. So quickly note that. And now let's jump back in this file. The reason why you're seeing boxes instead of toothbrushes is because I'm using a Redshift proxy. It's similar to XREF in Cinema 4D, and the reason for it was because the toothbrushes had extremely high polygon count, so I could not even scrub like this. And I have like 20 or 30 toothbrushes in a row here. So as you can see, it would be very challenging to work like that. But Redshift proxies are great. The way you set them up is super easy. You just go in and let's say create a new one. Let's create our shape. Make this editable. And we have the shape. We can go into File, Export, Redshift Proxy. I already have a whole bunch of shapes in here, but let's just save over that one. That's fine. Save. Yes, I want to replace it. Sometimes if you have lights, if you have any of that, you can select yes. But I usually just, this is fine. I don't have any lights, so I'm totally fine with everything here. Okay. So it created our proxy shape. Now I can just delete this because I don't need it anymore. And Redshift, I can go into Objects, select my Redshift proxy, and in the attributes for object here, I can select Path and select my shape, open that up. Now you'll see this bounding box. However, if you want to have a preview, you can just go over here and say Mesh, and it will show you. You can turn off the bounding box if you want, but the preview percentage is kind of neat because if you do have a very high polygon count model, you can always lower it down a little bit, so you can still kind of make out your shape, but it's not so taxing on the system. So yeah, helped out a lot, sped up my workflow, highly recommend it. A quick camera overview. When I started out, I didn't take photography or cinematography class, so I would just work with the default camera settings and didn't really, and I thought that was just fine until I started getting more experienced and understanding that there's other uses for other focal lengths, and that's what we will talk about next. And the basic one, the default one in Cinema 4D is a 36mm, and it's very versatile. It's if you use it, you'll be fine. But also note that there are other focal lengths out there. There's a telephoto lens, which is between 85 to 300mm lens. It's great for character work. It's great for objects that need to appear small. So things like on the table, if you have something on the table to make it look miniature, you would use a telephoto lens. I use a telephoto lens on the Oral-B Sizzle, the toothbrush, because it's a small toothbrush and it lives on the table. So it makes sense to use a telephoto lens instead of a 36mm. Next one is a complete opposite, the wide-angle lens. And that one is used in architecture, landscapes, cityscapes. It's basically designed to fit in as much of the scene as possible. And one thing to note about it is it will warp and distort your lines. So if you needed very straight lines, that like horizontal lines, those will be disrupted. They'll kind of like angle inward a little bit. So just be careful when you're dealing with logos. If you're working with something that has to be precise, probably not the best fit, but aside from that, it's a really fun camera to work with. Okay, we went over the different focal lengths. Now let's see how they're applied inside Cinema 4D. So I have my 3 cameras I talked about. my 35mm, my telephoto lens, and a wide angle lens. You can see that they are all located at the same spot. So the same position, same rotation, everything's the same. Just the only thing that I have changed is the focal length here. So we have our 35. This is what it looks like. This is our 35. It starts to make things look smaller, like the chain. You know, it feels like it's sitting on the table. It's like jewelry or something. And then you have your telephoto lens, which it makes it look even more miniature than before. So these people do look very small in comparison even to the chain. And then we jump to our wide angle. Woo! So everything fits in. All my landscaping is in there in frame. The chain is starting to get a little distorted here, but you know, because it is landscape, it works. I would not be using my 35mm here, or a telephoto lens. Like if I drag out my telephoto lens so that it has the same framing, you can see what happens. This is me dragging it out. Everything gets cropped. It doesn't look good. So on my telephoto lens, I'm trying to get the same framing as with my wide angle lens. Even this is kind of meh. Like you're losing the distance here. So again, just knowing what cameras to use. I used for the Oral-B commercial, I used like I mentioned before, a telephoto lens. So let's move on to the animation. How do we animate camera now? So the first camera I'd like to talk about is a morph camera. It's probably the most simple animation to set up, camera animation, because it only requires pretty much 2 keyframes and 2 cameras. And also I'll talk a little bit about snap zooms, or it's just a technique to create a more dynamic visual style, dynamic camera animation. Oh, and I also rendered out a quick preview of the camera morph that I'm going to show you now. So this is just a quick example of what I'll be demoing in a few seconds. Basically just a pullback from the close-up. I'm also changing the focal length here. So as you can see, everything starts out small, not small, like a very close-up, and then it pulls back to the full landscape. All right, let's switch to cinema now. All right. So in my project file, this I built for my students. It was a demo I did at the beginning of my fall semester. Students who've never touched Siemón 4D, it was just to show an example of how quick and how easy Siemón 4D is to use, and just a basic setup, visually get them excited for the semester. And I have this wave here that I did in X particles. I have a chain that I built in MoGraph, just some landscaping, and also this shape, which these characters that are rigged are eventually will be pushing, rotating. And there was supposed to be like some other little elements, but I didn't have time because the class is only so long. So I'll fill it in and animate and all that good stuff in the near future. It's kind of my excuse for everything. Yeah, I'll do it. But then life takes hold, and eventually I'll retire to my farm and do this and finish all the unfinished projects. Okay, getting back on track. I have, let's see, my layers system here. Let me see all my cameras. Maybe not the morph yet. So as I showed before, the 3 cameras, the cool thing is when you do switch, so let's see, this is my wide angle, and then say I want to switch to this, it has like this animation kind of already built in, you can kind of see. And there's a little like jump here because I believe that my my wide angle is probably not on the same, no, it's not on the same rotation as the rest. Zeroing out properties is really important, kids. Just keeps things simple and neat and clean, easy to use. So, okay. Getting back, telephoto lens, now it has a better jump. And you can actually just transition between these two cameras with the different focal lengths by using camera morph. So let me hide this here in my layer system. Just gonna hide this out of here and then focus on my camera morph. So I have my camera morph here. How do we set it up? Well, let's just delete the setup and let's work with the cameras I do have. So I have my wide angle lens over here. So if I preview this, this is my wide angle lens. It has focal length of 20, and then my telephoto lens is this extreme close-up, and the focal length here is 300, so it's really close up. And now I want to move between these and have kind of like a snap zoom, and a snap zoom is when things are just kind of like pulling back really fast and then like slowing down. Just makes for a more dynamic camera feel animation, product animation. So very quickly, very simple, once you have your cameras laid out, so I have my two cameras laid out, just highlight both of them and then go into your camera icon and select your camera morph. It won't work, so say I have just one selected. This is going to be grayed out because you need 2 or more cameras to do a camera morph. Makes sense. Alright, and I'm back. Sorry about that. I had to mute my notifications. Now, where were we? Camera morph. Alright, 2 cameras. You got a camera morph. I'm just going to drag it here because that's where I already have it. I'm just going to delete this unnecessary null here. So I have my camera morph. It comes from, actually I can just take it out here and I'll just do this. So what does that look like? Let's highlight this guy, and now we have this tag that it puts there, which is your camera morph tag, which is where you can blend in between your cameras by using the slider. So, and down here it shows you which camera it's using. You can also, this is a simple morph, you can do multi-morph and you just drag and drop. You can put more cameras under here instead of just 2. Like I can do, okay, so let's just drag and drop these 2 guys in there, and then I can add more cameras, and then it will morph between each one of those. So let's see, let's just go from here, then we'll drag our keyframe to here, and then let's go 100% blend. And then I believe I added some animation to my, yes I did, to my wide angle lens for the pullback. So I'm going to highlight my keyframes, right click, animation, show track. And then it shows me my curves here. So right now, yeah, so I have this pullback on one of the cameras. The cool thing about camera morph too is you can animate individual cameras, and then it will morph between those animations with the camera morph. So I'm gonna add my camera morph into my curve editor here, and then we'll see what we got. So I probably want to maybe, when does that jump? Yeah, so I'm going to, and you can switch between the curve mode and the dope sheet mode, so that way it's, you know, it's easier. Actually, that's not the one that I need to do. Oh yeah, it is. No. Camera morph, that's the one. Because I want to just make it go a little faster, and then it continues to pull back a little slower at the end. Because that animation I already have. So go back to our curve editor. I'm going to press H to frame all my keyframes in. And now I'm probably going to adjust my curves slightly. Let's see how that feels. Let's see if we have the values that I want, or the animation field that I want. Yeah, it's good. It's not as dramatic, so I can always just make this a little tighter in space. So that feels pretty good. So again, very simple. It's just, you know, these are my values for the camera morph. Here's my one camera, and then my second camera is up here. So the curve editor is great. I love the curve editor in Cinema 4D. It's so easy to use and understand, as opposed to like After Effects, which I always find so much more cumbersome, because you have like the speed curve, but then you have your regular value curve, and it doesn't make sense. Like here, everything makes sense. You know, you have your 0 value and it goes up, and how fast can you go from, you know, one to the other. Like here's obviously it's climbing up higher to get to that value, and then it starts to slow down to approach that final value here. It just makes sense. Like I'm always so pained at doing any sort of curves inside After Effects. I mean, I do it because, you know, you have to, but it's not as intuitive as it could be. That's why I think like all those presets and everything else are so popular, because I feel like more people feel like the same way as I do. All right, camera morph done. Got our snap zoom where it speeds up. We can accentuate this even more by just, you know, shrinking the time here, so it's a little bit more pronounced, and then it goes and it slows down. So same thing again, if we go back into this guy. Whee! So for Spline camera, I have a little example here as well. So this is the animation I did, quickly just illustrating the animation I'll be showing, all using just a spline and target for the camera. So let's jump into that. So this is what I have, the same scene, except now we have a wall. Oh, I think we had a wall on the previous one, right? I don't remember. So we have, oh, maybe not. No, we didn't. I have things that are going on here. I have a camera, and it is has a tag aligned to spline tag. This is a spline that I just drew, and then the camera follows the spline, and then I have a null, a target null, just for extra control. So how do you set this up? Well, it's what are the uses too? So the uses for this, I find, is when I have to travel a great distance, like if there's and also if there's a lot of like rotation, and I have to have the camera looking in different directions, and just it just makes it, if it's just traveling through like a certain space, right? Whether it be like inside a house, if I'm traveling from room to room to like a second floor, then I will use a spline. I won't try to do it with camera morph or with any other types of tools. I'll probably just use a spline, because I can outline the path that the camera will take, and it will follow that path. Also, like in sports animations, when I was doing those for a brief moment, I also use a spline just because it has to travel a great distance, like in the stadium or something like that. It just makes things a little easier when you know exactly the path that your camera is taking. Oh, and medical animation too, like when I had to go through like the vessels inside the body, because they're curved, I just, you know, use the camera, the spline camera, and it just went through. So it's good as if you have a path that you need to take with your camera. So here is how to set this up. So let me just delete these guys here. I'll zero all of this out. So we'll start new. And then I'm not sure what the it looks up. Okay. So I'll also get rid of my keyframes, right click, delete track. So maybe I'll just do 0. All right, so this is pretty good. And now I have my camera set up. So all you have to do is right click, some 4D tags, align to spline, drag and drop the spline that you drew. You just need to, draw a spline. This was really, really rough, just like really quickly laid out. And you just need to drag and drop your cam spline. Make sure to name things, folks, so you don't get confused. Now, from in the spline tag, you have this position. So you just set your keyframe at 0, and then I think I have it traveling. I'm gonna go to 300 because it's a long way to go. So set up to 100, and then you have your animation here. Let me hide the spline so we don't have to see it. And now if I press go, it just, it goes around. Now it's not looking at anything right now. It's just kind of keeping the same direction of the camera as it was before. What we can do is check off tangential. I don't really use it too much because I like to have control over where my camera is looking, independent of the spline. So I don't always use this, or pretty much never use this, because hitting the floor and then it's like, oh, I gotta turn up. Oh, where is this? And it's like, it's just a little clunky and it's not really looking the right way anyways. But it helps if you're in a vessel, like a blood vessel, and you're traveling, if you're doing medical animation, then it works for that. I've used that for that. All right, so now we're just gonna actually go back and uncheck that so we don't have the camera looking the way it's looking. So we have that, and now I'd like to manually set this up so it is looking down. This example was actually inspired by Game of Thrones, so I like, that kind of like, I think one of their shots was, you're going down and then under and everything else. So I thought, after watching that over and over again, I kind of subconsciously decided, hey, that was a pretty cool camera move. Let me do it too. So I have my keyframe set for rotation, so it's looking down, and then I'm probably gonna bring it up actually a little closer to, let me right click animation, show track. So this is my animation track here. Scale this inward a little bit. Okay, and then down we go. I'm gonna drag this out a little bit more. And probably around here I'd want to start to bring my camera up. That's fine for now. Alright, so we can actually just slide this over and out. Alright. Nice. So it's going down, and then maybe like this. And then it goes out, and then it's going to go in. And now what we also want to do, I mean, this is if you're not using a target. But see, the problem then is, like, you can start rotating your camera and say, and do the manual thing where you're constantly, rotating and then setting keyframes. But like here, you would rotate. But there's an easier way of doing this, and that is through just a target null. So you can set up, I have a target here. So this is my target null over here, and then I'm just going to right click, Siemón 4D tags, target, and then drop my null into here. And now it's going to look at the shape the entire time. So it's constantly looking at where my target null is. So let me make this actually bigger, make it star, and then let's make it a bigger star. Okay, so this is my target here, and if we go down, it's looking at it, and then the target, the null starts to move closer to the shape, and then it's inside the shape, and then it's going up, so the camera is pointing up towards it. This is probably a better indication of how that works. I know it's a little messy, but bear with me. See, the target comes in, the camera is doing its rotation because it's following a spline. Again, camera comes in, it's following the spline, goes up, but it's always aiming at that target. So that's just another way of setting up a kind of like a travel scene, if you will. So fairly simple, but great results. Let's move on to, I believe we're going with the camera nulls. So camera and nulls, that is my preferred way of animating cameras, just because I feel like it gives me the most amount of control for the type of work that I usually do, which is, you know, very editorial, where it's just a lot of edits. There's a lot of cuts between the shots. So to get that maximum amount of control, it's not, I don't really tend to do a lot of sweeping moves for the commercial work. A lot of it is cuts and which rely on really great camera work, and the nulls, again, give me that control I need. Here's a quick just preview of what we're going to be animating. This was done all with nulls, and you can see even like this is a much smoother animation than the previous one, which was a spline. It just flows so much better. It still has that little bit of that snap zoom at the end, but it just gives you a lot more control and flexibility. So let's jump into this. All right, let's see. We have, so what do we have? We have the same scene, except now I have my camera. Let's see if I have my nulls turned on. Let me make sure I have those. Yes. So, and I will also change the visuals actually. Let's make it a star again. So we have that one, and then maybe the star will be our position, and cube, maybe not a cube, maybe a circle will be our rotation null. So what do we have here? We have my camera is a child of the position null, and that position null in turn is a child of the rotation null, which is over here, and then we have everything under a bigger parent, just a regular camera null. So it gives you 4 levels of animation, really, because you can animate independently your, which I do here, but I'm just animating focal length. You can animate the properties in your camera, you can animate position, properties, rotation, and then you have the overall null that you can also animate. So there's a lot of control for a smooth motion. So then here is the example of what it's doing. Let me turn off these shapes here. I don't know where it is. Objects. Let me turn this off because they're kind of in the way. All right. There we go. So the camera rotates around and then it pulls back. So, and then it pulls back. So how do we set this up? So let's start with just let's zero everything out so that we have, again, let's see, position. Just gonna delete all the keyframes here. You know what's an easier way of doing this would be to just go into my timeline. Okay. So, and deleting all these guys. Nice. And now let's go back to position. I can reset this. I think this is all good and fine. Let's do reset my nulls, I mean my rotation. All right, and now, and also this one as well. Okay. So I have, again, camera parented to position. The position should be the way that this is. Let's just set this. I don't know what this is and why it's here. Why are you here? I guess I should probably just add to objects. Okay. Clean this stuff up. Let me make this timeline smaller. I could probably just fit it in, but for now this is fine. I'm just going to show how this is set up. So we have a camera, you have your, you know, like where you want it to be. So say we like it here. This works for us. So the framing is good. We're happy with this. So to set up your first initial null is a position null. That's how I like to work. I like to set up my position null first, and then my rotation, and then an extra position null at the end. So I have my position null. I'll make it a child of my camera just to zero out all the properties, and so that it's sitting with my camera. Also, let me turn off the wall so we don't see the wall and the wave. So it's a little cleaner here. Again, zeroed out our properties, take this null out, make this a child. Now it's directly sitting at the start of your camera, so it matches the position it was already, and your camera is zeroed out. So the properties are zeroed out, which is really great. It just makes everything so easy to use when you start off with zeroed out properties, as opposed to like some arbitrary values, and you're just like, what was that again? So clean is good. Now, speaking about clean, naming. So I'm gonna say position but null. Okay, got that guy in there. Now we have to have our rotation set up. So let's get our rotation. I'd like to have it basically at the wherever the edge of my camera is, like the end of this. So I'm gonna pull it back so it's, I probably should turn on my grid too. I'm gonna turn my grid. And I'll bring this up because I like to have it like completely in line with my camera so that it's not off by any means. I'm sure there's a faster way of doing this, but okay. So this is going to be our rotation null, and then we'll make that a child of that. So now we can do things like this very easily. But I'm not done yet. I want to add all of this into one final note, which is kind of going to be, I'm just going to say, oh, nope. Up here. I'm just going to say camera hero null. As long as you know what it means, it's all good. Okay, so we have our basic rig set up with all our controls in place. So now we can start animating and doing some fun things. So the first one I'm going to do is I'm going to get my rotation set up. So I'm just going to go 90 degrees, set my keyframe. I like to animate value, each value separately. I just find that to being also cleaner, so I don't get confused as to why sometimes things don't work out so well. So right now, this looks good. I'm also going to do a rotation, probably kind of like this. This is good. I'm going to set up my keyframe here. It's going the opposite direction, but that's okay. Let's do 0. That's not okay. Huh. I mean, it's kind of neat, but that's not what we really want. So let me 0 that out again, actually, and let's just delete track. Let's see what we got going on here. Maybe this will be minus 90 for now. Actually, minus 180. And then, oh, this is my focal length. I want rotation. I'm like looking at why is there no keyframes where I need them. Okay, and now let's see what we got in our curves. Rotation. So we can do something like this. Basically, when we are working with, I mean, in general, knowing how to work with curves is really important because it will just make your life so much better. So that works well now. So see, it was just a matter of just tweaking some curves for it not to look funky. So that's fine. We're twisting, we're turning, we're going down, and now we will, yes, I am doing that right now. So twisting, turning, going down, and then we're going to use, I'm not sure if we're going to use a position. I kind of want to just use a hero now and animate that out. So I'm just going to set the keyframe and then pull this back through the wall. And then we still have this position null just left in there, just in case we need to tweak it. Actually, I'm going to pull this up even more. Do I want to lift it up? I want to lift it up too. Let's see what that looks like, shall we? Why not? Oh. Well, I think I messed this up. Let me set the keyframe for this one. So here, let's do that, and let's go. And then I guess we can always move it up and over, and maybe even higher. So let's see what that looks like. I would mess around with the curves a little bit more to just make it smoother, but you get the gist. So all these values you can independently animate. And very important is to go into your timeline and really mess around with your curves. Make sure that they are working. Make sure that they're set correctly. They will give you dynamic results, and that they're sexy little curves. But seriously, another thing to know just really quickly is when you are doing an edit, I've noticed that a lot of people just kind of don't realize that they should go into the curve editor to make sure that their curves are set correctly, because by default, Cinema 4D, which is great, does an ease in and ease out for you, but sometimes you don't want that, especially in the edit. So I've noticed that sometimes like the edit will the camera work will just be like, okay, I'm gonna think about it and I'm gonna start, and the camera moves and then it stops, and then we go to the next scene, and then again I'm sitting there and then I'm watching, and the camera is like, all right, I'm gonna go, and then it does its thing and then it stops, and then we go to the next scene. So when working with cameras, just make sure that you check your curves, make sure that they're exactly what you want, and when you start editing, that you cut out those slow pieces if you do have them, like the times when it's like stops. But preferably you'll just do like a linear or something, so it's just like one camera move, and it doesn't have this like stop and go. So blocking a camera is a technique used when you're working, for instance, with style frames and you're pitching on a product commercial, so you just have to create a story around this product. And the way you do it is you have your object here, for instance, and what I've done is I've created, I've added a whole bunch of cameras around the object to start telling a story, basically, of how the sequence is going to go. So I have my close-up, I have another camera that's also a close-up, and then it starts pulling out further to reveal more information, and you have this shot, and there's of course the other shots that we looked at before. So you're basically starting to build kind of like a storyline for your animation. And it's great to do that because it gives you a reference when you do start animating of what shots you want to animate. And I literally just start creating cameras and rotating them in interesting angles and interesting, changing the focal length, and just an interesting composition is really your goal here. And then once you have all of these shots set up, you can render out, still, and you basically time it out in After Effects. You can drop it in and see if the flow works. And one of the other ways that I like to work is when I do have this, I like to the story that I like to tell, usually it's fairly systematic. You start off either with like a really close-up shot or like two close-up shots, for instance, and you get the viewer interested. And they're just like, oh, what's that? Like, what's that close-up of? Like, I don't really understand. And that, like, not understanding, like, that confusion is what's going to keep them interested for a longer time until you have a call to action, for instance. So it's a good technique to know. And then, like, finally, like, you reveal, like, little pieces here and there, and then your final is kind of like the whole reveal of what you're trying to sell or show. So that's blocking, and there's a few other cameras I didn't get into, which are also really fun. Let's see, over here in our camera icon, we have the motion camera. So the motion camera, let me actually use my previous one. Maybe focal length? Sure, why not? Let's drop in our motion camera. So you get this like guy with a handheld camera, and if we hide the other cameras for now, and then highlight the motion camera, you can see that it wiggles kind of like a handheld steady cam, and you can make the character smaller. That's holding the camera. So, and you can move him closer. or you can probably move the distance closer. I don't use this too often, or really that much, because most of the time I don't have to do a lot of steady camera work, but it's kind of a neat effect, right? And if I do need to do it, I would use a vibrate tag, but this is a kind of a neat feature in Cinema 4D if you want to just add a little extra movement. And to do the vibrate tag, you would simply right-click Cinema 4D tags, and there's a vibrate tag here, and you can enable the position, and then we'll vibrate it. It gets a little crazy. I mean, obviously you can tone this down, and you can do a lot of different, and that applies not only for the camera, it can be on any of the Cinema 4D features. But the Steadicam, the Steadicam setup, this motion camera is kind of fun. And then another one is this camera crane. So it's very similar to the setup I showed you with the nulls, where here it's just in a kind of a clean package, where all your kind of setups are here. You can do your pitch, so lower this down so you can see more. And you're really just animating these attributes. I don't really know why well, I guess I don't use it because I'm, it's just what I'm used to, really. But I like the control. I like the control of nulls, really. I don't know, it makes me just more comfortable with that. I don't know. But it's cool to know that there is a crane of a camera crane available in Cinema 4D for those like dolly shots, which are pretty cool. And I'm sure I'll be using it in the future. Just haven't done that in the past. So, all right. So that pretty much covers everything I wanted to talk about in terms of cameras. I mean, there's a whole lot more. I could probably do another video that's over an hour long on all the other things that are camera related, but I have to stop somewhere. All good things must come to an end. So thanks again for hanging out with me, and I hope you guys learned something. And if you want, you can come and check me out on my website, and I'm also on Twitter and Instagram. So see you later.